It's there. So welcome to Data is a Team Sport. This is School of Data's online conversations, videos, and podcasts where we are exploring the ever-evolving data literacy ecosystem. For those of you joining the Hangout, Tom and Stub, firstly, we want to say thank you for coming. Here are some guidelines that will help you in participating, and I know you guys know this already, but we need to ask that you stay on mute, and just some apologies for this, as you know what it's like. But actually, Stub, I know you can't come off mute. But Tom, actually, I might, because we already know your mic is working, that if you do have a question, I might get you to come off mute and ask it when we get to that portion. You also already know about the chat room, but just to remind everyone, it is in the upper right-hand corner, and you click it, and you will see the chat room appear on the left-hand side. Any questions or comments while we are going through this series of questions in the interviews, please feel free to type them there. And when we get to the point where I'm wondering if you have questions, I might then get you guys to ask the questions, or we will just do it via the text-based thing. Just a reminder that this Hangout is broadcasted live on YouTube. A recording will be made available on YouTube immediately after we are finished. We are using the audio for our podcast series, and we will also publish notes and URLs for everything that gets referenced on the School of Data blog at schoolofdata.org. For those of you that don't know, I'm Dirk Slater from FabWriters, and along with being an active member of the School of Data community, we also provide workshops, skills building, and consultation for advocates and activists on how to build data-driven tactics to make their social change strategies more effective. In this episode of Data is a Team Sport, we are talking mentors, mediators, and mad skills, and taking a look at how we get organizations beyond data literacy and towards data maturity. So joining me in the conversation today is Tim Geber, an independent freelancer with over a decade experience as a creative strategist, designer, and technologist, with experience in human-centered design and service design, project implementation, and workshop facilitation. Welcome, Tim. Thank you so much for being here. How are you?
Hi, everyone. I'm doing great. How are you, Dirk?
I am fabulous, of course. Also joining us is Emma Prest. She oversees the running of DataKind UK, leading the community of volunteers and building understanding about what data science can do in the charitable sector. Welcome, Emma. Thank you so much for being here. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me, Dirk.
I'm so glad you are here. And let me just start off with you, Emma. Can you tell us a little bit about what are the lessons learned that DataKind UK has had in helping organizations increase their digital and data maturity?
Yeah, okay. So let me just unpack data maturity a little bit. So we got really excited by the idea of data maturity a few years ago, and found that loads of companies in the private sector had spent ages developing kind of data maturity frameworks and understanding what it means. And so we thought, better work out what this means for the nonprofit space. And so last year we teamed up with another organization called Data Orchard, and we actually did a survey with 200 nonprofits and interviewed 12, and came up with this whole framework and tried to really get to grips with what data maturity means for an organization as a whole. And it basically, unsurprisingly, came down to some really, important stuff around people. A lot of it's around kind of leadership, whether leadership is interested in data, in making data-driven decisions, whether the culture is open, and whether people share data between teams in an organization, also what skills are in-house, plus other things like whether the organization collects data, what kinds of technology the nonprofit uses, the kinds of analysis they do, what they use the data for. Anyway, so we built this kind of data maturity framework, and so we've been using it a lot to understand what an organization is doing with data, whether they need someone to come in and just help them with some spreadsheet stuff, or whether they need more sophisticated analytical support or data science, which is what DataKind does. And as we've kind of been going through this, one of the things that kept coming back and coming out of this research was that organizations and nonprofits want to do more with data, but they just don't know what that is. They don't know what good looks like. They've never come across an organization that uses data well. So they have like no example of like, so like a role model, which is really interesting. And so what we do at DataKind is we partner with a nonprofit, and we run often what is like one of their first data projects with them. And we hold their hand from beginning to the end of the project, in the hope that they, through the process, understand what makes for a good analytical question, what's good about their data, what's not so good about their data, like what kinds of things data analysts and data scientists can do, what they can't do. And then also at the end, we write up a case study, and we try to kind of, promote that as an example to others. And so what we've seen through the DataKind, what our lessons are, is that you've got to do it with people. You can't just tell them, you can't just show them, you've got to like do the project with someone, and that's like the best way of them really getting to grips with data.
And so, I mean, and this is the piece that I think is really, really critical for people to understand in terms of like, training is just going to get you so far in sort of raising the awareness, and possibly just getting that like opening their people's minds into understanding like how to move forward. But this bit in terms of what you're saying in terms of data maturity, which is like, how does an organization understand what good data practice is really through this thing of doing, running a project with them and getting them to have that understanding of, here is good, and it is their own understanding, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's quite hard, because I think you need people who kind of often junior people who have the skills and have the energy and enthusiasm to do it, but you need other like managers to have a certain amount of data literacy. You need leaders to be bought into it and willing to like invest in it, because obviously you often need to buy new software and send some of your staff on training. And so you need people throughout the whole organization to be bought into it to actually make it work. And, as we know, data is a team sport. It's not just like you hire a data person and put them in the corner and no one talks to them. That doesn't work. It needs to be something that's like throughout the whole organization.
Right. And it's also that piece of understanding when you need to reach out to get external expertise, and what you shouldn't also be having in-house, because you need to devote resources and capacity to those very important things, and not beyond. Let me grab Tin here and get him to share a bit of insights in your experiences, of working with a variety of different kinds of organizations and getting them to get beyond, just understanding that piece of like, here's how we move forward.
Well, yeah. First of all, Emma, the comment on organizations not knowing what doing good data stuff is like it's vital and fundamental. That's such a good point. So I mostly work with organizations. Mostly activists and groups, advocacy groups. Of small to medium size. I've lately been working a lot in the Balkans and Eastern Europe, which is a very particular context in itself. So, but I've also worked in other contexts, but I will try to kind of like focus on a region when I make some examples, so that they are not all over the place. A big thing that I noticed is that when an organization tries to approach data and technology and link it into their processes, there's this in the process of learning technology, tech at the beginning is hard, then it becomes easy, and then it becomes hard again. Because at the beginning it's hard because there are so many unknown unknowns. You have no idea what the words mean and how to use the tools that you might be using. And then when you start learning about all the possibilities that technology can give you, it starts looking really easy, because technology seems to be the answer to everything. And that's where organizations get really excited. And then they usually dive in, but then they hit the wall with the second part, which is, technology holds a lot of promises, but it's actually really hard to implement once you get into the actual implementation phase. And it's always fun to see organizations going through this process and going through it at the end to be like, oh, okay, now I understand it's not as difficult as I thought at the beginning, but it's also not as wonderful, unicorny as I thought in the middle. It's like a realistic consideration of what is and is not possible. And I think the one thing that my main lesson is also linking back to what Emma said, that the best way to teach people to actually integrate data into their process is to be with them. Usually, the way when I work with organizations, what I love the most is working on a specific project, especially if an organization has an opportunity to start a new project that involves more technological capacity than before, and then use that project as a testing ground as to what does it mean to become a more tech, tech literate or tech mature organization. I've had a very good fortune of working now with a Croatian transparency organization, Gong, that decided to build a politically exposed persons database, and also to use this big 2-year project as like this big step towards becoming a technologically mature organization, and basically testing out all the different ways in which technology can be integrated and where it should or could be integrated on a larger organizational framework.
That's great. And I'm curious in terms of because you're both working with a variety of different kinds of organizations, and Tin, just a little bit in that, like, you mentioned sort of the different geographic organizations, geographical regions and organizations that you're working with. Like, what do you see as the main differences between those different kinds of organizations in working with them around their needs?
The needs in building up their technology maturity.
Yeah.
I mean, apart from the obvious, contextual stuff that, that people can, make a list of, if you don't have internet, then it's pretty hard to think about how to start working with technology. And I think like the two main dimensions of where, differences come out are geopolitical and stakeholder based. On the geopolitical side, it is like all the context is there, like who are you working with, what are you working on, what kind of environment and culture there is in your country specifically. I mean, I work a lot with organizations working on a subnational or national level. And while you can count on, support from groups from outside that region or outside that country, it is not as useful as it is creating like strong national or subnational networks with technologists and other organizations. And so that's like the biggest kind of challenge, because every single country, every single culture has a completely different approach to all things tech. And the other is a stakeholder. It's like, who are you working with? If you're like a government, like a transparency and accountability organization, if you're all about like anti-corruption and transparency of the government, then your biggest problem is the government. And it's, your issues and your challenges are not your own first and foremost, but it's about whose data you're using and how open they are to sharing it, what kind of, political environment there is, and so on.
Cool, thanks. And Emma, would love to get your take on that question too, because I know DataKind UK is focused in the UK, but you guys are working with like a lot of different kinds of organizations within that. So curious in terms of what you see are the major differences, say, between advocacy organizations, service organizations, or any other different kinds that DataKind is working with.
Yeah. So I suppose we have it slightly easier than Tin in that we are mainly working with UK organizations, and it's one more or less homogenous culture, and we kind of have so we're all starting from the same page. But yeah, so we found that a lot of service delivery organizations are like, I suppose it's much more obvious and intuitive to work with them from a data science perspective. So if you think that they are providing the same kinds of services to the same groups, populations of people on repeat, and that data science is really great at optimizing processes. So if you think that like Amazon uses algorithms to sell more stuff to certain kinds of people, you can use those same data science tools and techniques to better understand who your users are as a service, to understand who's more likely to do well in your program or who's likely to drop out. Or so that works, I'd say, from a data science perspective really well. And we started to make a bit of a foray into working with advocacy and campaigning organizations recently. And I'd say that it's like they're not necessarily doing the same thing on repeat. They research or investigate something, do a campaign around it, and then go off and do something else. So it's not always exactly the same. But that said, we've got a couple of projects actually with Global Witness, which is really interesting. So one of them is around trying to identify kind of anomalous or unusual company behavior. So traditionally, Global Witness gets like leaked people or organizations they should investigate, or they get leads in other ways. But this is like, can you actually systematically be trawling through data to generate leads of what looks like slightly strange behavior that their investigators should look into? And then also there's another project going on with DataKind where they're using satellite imagery to look at kind of mining activity. So I mean, I think from a data science perspective, there's all kinds of applications across different kinds of organizations. But one of the things we're much more interested in is like the impact we can have. And we find that if we're working with small to medium-sized nonprofits, we can have quite an immediate impact. And if we're working with like some of the really big guns organizations, it's a slower process, obviously. And it's harder, I think, to kind of create change and to have, there's no immediate like kapow of a project, because things just take a long time and you have to get so much sign off. So I think, we've got a really clear idea of what we can do with, say, like a small homelessness charity. And we do prefer, I suppose, probably to work with those kinds of organizations.
Well, I know it's interesting because I think, a small organization in terms of being able to deliver impact is in some ways much easier, not much easier, but can be more rewarding for somebody that is working as the mediary between a couple of different organizations. But the other thing that I think is quite critical, one is this thing, and I'm glad you mentioned the Global Witness Project, because the last episode we had around advocacy organizations with Sam Leon from Global Witness, like he started to bring up, how important it was to be able to bring in people from the outside and also people that are working with organizations and sort of get those sort of shared lessons learned. So, one of the critical things that we can do as, sorry, I'm going to use the word intermediary, but as somebody that working with multiple organizations is carry the relevant stories for each organizations in terms of, how does this work with somebody else? And often people will learn very, very well from sort of the peer organizations and putting them in touch with that. So really critical. But I'm curious, Emma, in terms of all the different types of organizations that you see within the UK, where do you really see gaps in the ecosystem?
So actually, I'm going to tie back to the last podcast in this series, because I think what's really interesting is that if we're trying to bring about change within nonprofits and we're trying to get them to be more effective and efficient, and we believe the data and technology can do that, and for large organizations, you need the Milenas and the Sams. You need the people who are the barge turners, who are there internally and dealing with all the political stuff, and and they know at what point to bring in someone external. That I think those people are fundamental and are quite rare. And I don't entirely know how you create more Milenas and Sams in this world. I think there are different ways. I think kind of mentorship actually is one really interesting way. So having probably Milena and Sam go on to mentor other people in equivalent big INGOs who are trying to do those things would be great. I think like fellows as well, embedding people in organizations, as we said earlier, like you need to hold people's hands and show them how to do it. So while there is a role for training, I don't think training in and of itself is enough. Although that said, I do think there needs to be a lot more like hard training of like data skills and data analysis, because there actually aren't even that many courses available for people to send people on, especially if you think that most NGOs are doing the same analysis. They're looking at who's having which outcomes in which program, and it's the same stuff over and over again. And like, we should have sorted that out by now. There should just be like a 1-week training course people can go on to like see how other organizations do it and see what tools there are. Yeah, so I think there's something around training.
You mean something like a dashboard?
Yes, we need a dashboard, an online training dashboard with a MOOC attached that will just solve everyone's problems. Yeah, so anyways, I just feel like there's something a bit more around like having maybe peer-to-peer networks actually. So at DataKind, we've really just early days, we've just started a network bringing together all the data scientists, data analysts we've kind of found in in civil society in the UK and brought them together into a group, and they've named themselves the Social Data Society, and they're meeting every 2 months at the moment.
That's cool.
So yeah, so there are a couple of different models. I think there's like just a massive gap actually in terms of where people get support in data literacy.
I love that, and I think that bit too of like trying to connect. Like it isn't so much of like us or intermediaries walking in and saying, here's the expertise, here's our expertise, and we can show you all the solutions, but actually connecting people to other people that have done it in the real world and are more the peers, connecting those folks and getting that network of practice where they're not just learning from each other in terms of how do you use data, but they're also building solidarity, right? And understanding each other's issues and stuff like that. Those networks of practice can be hugely powerful. But curious, Tin, for you, where do you see gaps in the sort of data ecosystem?
Well, first of all, plus 1,000 to everything Emma said. I think, like, first of all, if we think about, if I take the ecosystem concept and kind of like think about the entire system of different types of players in within any kind of social good project, which means adversaries and different stakeholders. I think one big gap is just the quality of the data that groups are working with that comes from the data producers themselves, which is sometimes dishearteningly bad. So sometimes, some organizations are just simply hobbled in their, their quest to use data properly because the data they get isn't proper. But speaking specifically about the organizations, I think, first of all, the big one is, as Emma said as well, these like the Emmas, the Sams and the Milenas and the Emmas of the world, because the tech bridge person is, and it's also kind of like not good calling that person a tech bridge person, because it's not a tech bridge, it's a bridge between, let's call it, tech and social good, for lack of a less horrible term, in the sense that specialization is great. It's really good to have organizations that do something really well, and nobody should or could know everything about data and technology and social good and campaigning and advocacy and everything. But then you need this figure that's capable of understanding where and how those combine and can talk together. And that is that's not a training. That's, as Emma said, that's a long process. It needs to be long and embedded. It's not a parachuter coming in and pointing a finger and saying, this is how you should do things. It's about having somebody internally and constantly, fixing and coordinating and compensating for how the organizational system changes. And to make that work, I think where training is very useful is on the fundamentals of data and technology across the board of the whole organization. Just the other week, we tried this. We had a 3-week workshop with civil society in Serbia, in Belgrade, and we tried to do a double whammy of working on their projects from the strategy perspective, and also getting some basic, fundamental, but actually practical skills in web development. Not because we are thinking that everybody there will actually create their own websites, but because it's really important to get that knowledge in your fingers about what does it mean, for example, to actually to write code. Why is it so important to not to skip a colon when you write a line? Because that is this fundamental ambient knowledge and understanding of what technology is behind the hood, that you don't need to actually do, but you need to, if you're comfortable with it and if you're familiar with it, you know what to ask for, what not to ask for, and what are the limits and how much you can push for certain things. And that is something that goes across the board. I think everybody should have a much higher fundamental ambient knowledge of what tech can or cannot do in the social good sector. We could also flip it on the other side and say that technologist organizations should also have the same kind of fundamental background knowledge of the social good part of things, which is also something that's lacking. But I think my first win would be to get the social good sector to improve their data fundamentals. And the last dimension is time. If we think about ecosystem, it's giving time to these things. One-off training will never be even remotely as useful as a 6-month or a year-long, or a continuous embedding of a certain process. These things take time because the classic 10,000 hours to get to become a virtuoso in something. Time needs to pass, and practical stuff needs to get into your fingertips.
Well, it's curious because one thing I want to touch on, because it's part of the title of this podcast, but in terms of doing mentorship, this thing that you've just raised, right, around time, that is the thing that is the resource that most organizations that we're working with have the least of. And when you see somebody that is a champion, or an organization that is getting beyond the just the demystification of the data stuff, and they need all that hand holding. Like I'm curious, like for me, one of the things that I found in being in doing mentorship is you know, trying to do routine points of communication that are not, you know, terribly long for people. So to say, okay, so we're going to talk every 2 weeks for 30 minutes or for an hour just to talk about what challenges you have and how you're going to get through that. And within that, you know, that you know, little bit of time becomes extra valuable because it isn't that long and people are talking through what challenges they're facing and you're sort of helping them move that forward. So just curious if you guys, if that resonates with you guys, have you, you know, had some experiences in doing the mentorship and in a way that doesn't cut that much into time for people?
Tim, do you want to take that?
Yes. Okay. I think, well, like from my perspective, I am a parachuter. Personally, I'm like the freelancer, the independent freelancer part is, you know, that life is that of a parachuter, and that's just the way it is. But inevitably, with every single project, I mean, there's always a long tail of follow-up, and there's always a prep part to any kind of support that any organization gets, because otherwise, I mean, it cannot be without it, because nothing can be like squeezed into a 2-day training.
Right.
That's just the way it is. And I think, I mean, and I think from the parachuter perspective, knowing that and making sure that you allow for that and giving people time also to marinate on what they learned and actually physically be there, actually, not physically in the room, but, you know, be there for them actively throughout their marinating process, marination,
I like that.
digestion, and I will stop spewing culinary words. But I think it's that, I mean, I think that is like, that speaks to the importance of having people actually embedded really organically within the organization. And again, you know, the Sams and Milenas of the world, because it always needs to be a continuous dynamic process, especially because, you know, externalities, things happen, and every project needs to be able to, you know, adapt to whatever comes out.
Cool. Emma, did you have any further thoughts on mentorship?
So I've been mentored, and I am mentoring, and I actually don't think the time, I think like when it's valuable for you, you make the time. I mean, I remember actively look forward to getting to spend time with someone every 2 weeks, because then I could, all the gnarliest like challenges I was thinking about, I would just save up to discuss with that person, and it was fantastic. So I think assuming it's a good relationship, I don't think it's a time thing. I think it's like, it's really crucial to finding the right person, I think, also, and that has the right experience, because I think frankly there aren't that many people out there who do have huge amounts of experience in you know, implementing and embedding technology and data in the nonprofit space. But I think it is, I mean, I kind of feel like everyone should have a mentor at all times, and I feel like I need to find myself a new mentor, to be honest.
I love, yeah, and like you guys, I love mentoring. It's and being mentored, like just the whole process of you know, having that set aside time, like you said, and being able to lay out your challenges, but then also when you're helping someone else think through their challenges, it's really a great way to, you know, get that learning out into your mind and all that. Curious for you guys, you know, you both have been in the trenches now for quite some time working on this stuff. In the last, you know, year, 18 months, with, you know, all the weird stuff that's been going on around populism and media and all that, we've been hearing a lot in terms of things like fake news and post-fact, and some of the data-driven confusion that's been going on, where people are using data in the news to sort of mask realities rather than expose them. Just curious for either of you, have your practices changed as a result of this?
Emma?
Yeah, I don't know if our practices have changed. I think if anything, it spurs you on to keep going. And I think it's, as you see how people can be manipulated, you want them to have better data literacy. You want them to be more critical. You want the nonprofits you're working with to be able to kind of articulate and back up the decisions they're making with data. DataKind in the States actually, after the election of Trump, put out a specific call for projects working the kind of democratic freedom space. So they really quite quickly responded and said, no, we want to support civil society to tackle this. So it didn't actually change the projects we're working on, but I think maybe it just makes it even more important for us to keep going in what we do.
Good, great. Tin?
I have two answers to that question, a professional one and a personal one. On the professional side, I think if we focus on if we talk about the Balkans, I think an important thing to mention is that fake news has been around for a long time here. That's just how we roll in the Balkans. We actually joke with organizations here in the Balkans when we connect with organizations from the US that are kind of panicking, in panic mode now, not knowing how to engage with all the the new dogmas coming out. We are like, oh, sweeties, should we just come there? Do you want a hand? We know about this stuff. We've been living with it for a while now. I think the one thing that is that has changed professionally is that this whole fake news thing is a good wake-up call for the fact that data doesn't necessarily or doesn't always beat dogma, and it's a very clear vivid call for the organizations who do work on data, who want to work on data, that work is still extremely important, but it's as important as is presenting and building a proper campaign around the data that you collect. It is not, now it's very obvious that, just collecting data and show and say, but look, the data says that, isn't enough. It's never been enough, but now it's very obvious that it's not only about, collecting the data, it's about making sure that you then also know how to present a strong argument on top of that. On the personal side, it changed everything. In that I am actually going back to school in September specifically to learn more about how algorithms and algorithmic decision making is influencing human beings and society. And I even wrote a paper that's published, but that I would plug shamelessly later on in the call.
That's great. And actually, I want to actually move forward just a little bit on that point, because I think one of the things, for intermediaries that we kind of, it's the thing in the back of, sometimes keeps me up at night in terms of, what are new technologies that I need to make sure that the organizations that I'm working with are going to understand, and try to do that demystification. So Tin, I know that you've been really trying to get your head around artificial intelligence and machine learning and all that, and how do you demystify that? So just curious about how you're thinking about approaching that, and how do you get organizations to really understand and grapple with new technologies that are coming down the pike? I think the most the most problematic thing about the technology, technological evolution generally, is that every time a new tool comes, it brings with it all sorts of beautiful promises of things that can be done with it. It also brings a huge iceberg of complexity with it that's not as visible as the shiny promises, especially if you think about data mining and machine learning and semantic analysis and oh, the AI can help us figure this out. We just have to throw documents at it and then we will magically get to a solution. I think the main risk and the main challenge is making sure that your demystification game is top-notch, to make sure that organizations know and understand how to navigate all these promises, because every single new technology is kind of exponentially more promising, but it's also exponentially harder to actually use, or it has a very specific and narrow focus. And Emma can talk a lot about that, about how much data science can and cannot help in different types of contexts, and kind of being able to demystify that and getting people to kind of inoculating people about and around understanding what can and cannot be done, and kind of use this critical approach towards new technologies is it's where it's at. Emma, thoughts from you on that?
So I think I would say civil society has been pretty good at pointing out all the potential problems with big data and responsible data issues. I think God. So I mean, what we do at DataKind is most of our projects involve machine learning and building algorithms. That's what we do. I suppose what we're trying to do is show how it can be done well and within what context it can work. So, as an example, we're working with a food bank in Yorkshire at the moment and building an algorithm that can help them understand who's more likely to need extra support. And we've been moving quite slowly with it. We've been, have a risk log. We're trying to understand what harm it could bring as well as the positives. But I think actually there aren't that many examples out there of where this stuff works well. And there are so many examples of where it's not gone so well. I mean, you just have to read Cathy O'Neill's book to understand that. And I think actually the DataKind is trying to show the positive side and like where this stuff can work. And I think to go back to Tim's point from earlier, like it's quite hard to implement a lot of this stuff. So it's like easy to build prototypes, but really hard to implement. And I think that's part of the reason there are so few examples to show of, machine learning, algorithmic decision making for social good that is doing its job well, because most nonprofits aren't able to implement this stuff yet, whereas big companies can and are racing ahead and doing it without necessarily thinking it through. Yeah, I think that's all I've got for you on that.
No, that's great. And just as you guys, I have to pause for just a second. I've got a lot of noise suddenly and I have to close the windows. But just a word of warning, Stub or Tom, if either of you want to ask a question, when I come back in just 30 seconds, if you guys have anything you want to ask, I will let you ask it. So just 1 second.
Tom, fill our void.
My ad-libbing skills are lacking.
And also just to say, oh, Tom, you're on. But just to say, I wanted to get Cathy O'Neill's book is Weapons of Mass Destruction, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good.
Wonderful, wonderful read.
Yeah, great book. Tom, did you have a question?
No, we're not.
That is fine. Do not worry. And we are just so pleased that you are here. Your lovely presence in here, and as well, another lovely presence is Stub. Stub, if you did have a question, please type it into the chat box, and we will get to it. It's okay if you don't. And also, just want to give you guys an opportunity. Do you have any questions for each other?
Ooh, I have two for Emma.
Oh God, okay, go on.
The first one is you were talking about how Emma Kind.
Yeah, let's rename it.
Yes, how DataKind's strategy works well with service delivery organizations, because machine learnings and algorithms can work well in that situation, because even if you don't have big data, you have a continuous flow of data, so it can work in that because it's constantly, kind of fixing itself. What are the biggest challenges? And I know this is a huge topic, but from like the experience in the UK, what are the biggest challenges in trying to work through data science with campaigning works like Global Witness when the big data isn't so big?
Interesting. So, well, first of all, the data we work with a lot of the service delivery organizations is quite awful. It's pretty patchy. It's pretty rough and ready analysis that sometimes we have to do. So with Global Witness, we're using open data. So it's all companies' house data. So it's not data they have themselves collected. So it's a different kettle of fish, so to speak. To be honest, a lot of our projects mix internal data of an organization. So for example, what an organization knows about its beneficiaries, or even about its supporters, its membership, with open data. So we're often kind of mashing together lots of different data sets, which is what the kind of the fun of data science is that we can now hack together loads of weird data sets we never originally would have done. So I don't know that I can, we haven't worked with enough advocacy campaigning orgs either to quite know. I mean, I think a lot of campaigning orgs that are more like, what are the campaigning orgs that like do online petitions and all those, like Avaz and all those guys? Like those guys have got data science down. Obviously, they were built with like digital in their blood.
Yeah.
So I think the Amnesties and the more traditional researchy, investigation-y ones are slightly more interesting because they're having to go through quite a big cultural shift at the moment. But we haven't done that much with them, so I don't know if I can say anything particularly intelligent on that matter.
No, that's really interesting. I like the because the concept of mashing up what they have with other sources that can be useful there. That's also a huge chunk of like service that you provide. You help them understand which data sets can be mashed up and what kinds of results there can be. That's pretty awesome. Question number 2: when are you guys coming to the Balkans?
Oh, that is great. I don't know. So basically, DataKind goes where there are existing communities of data scientists. And I'm just not sure if you can give us a heads up on where in the Balkans there are hubs of data science people.
I just gave myself work, didn't I?
Yes.
Okay.
Obviously, it relies on its volunteers. So we have to go where there are kind of active, communities, basically.
But that still reminds me, Emma, because one of the things I wanted to make sure that we got you to do was do that definition of what a data scientist is.
Oh God, interesting. Okay. Right. So if we think that data science is using advanced analytical and computational techniques to get new information from data, usually for the sake of supporting organizational decision making, which in and of itself could be, I would say more traditional kinds of business intelligence as well. But I think how data science is different is that it includes, as I said, different kinds of data sources. It can be satellite imagery and video and all kinds of stuff. And it's often quite forward-looking. And so you're trying to predict things as opposed to just report on what happened in the past. And then the data scientist is someone who tends to have a statistical skills mixed with coding and computer science skills, and key thing, and they have kind of issue area expertise. So if you think that a data scientist who works in, say, the insurance industry is going to do very different kinds of crunching as opposed to a data scientist who works for a supermarket, for example. It's quite a broad term, which is a bit of a catch-all. But in terms of our work, what we find is that we have data science volunteers, but they don't necessarily know anything about the issue area because we're working with, a charity that works with elderly people in a deprived area or whatever it may be. And so we have to work really closely with the nonprofit because they have the issue area expertise, and then we have the data people, and we have to very carefully, the team cohesion is really, really important when we work on projects like that, because there's a key piece missing actually from that.
Well, but because the thing for me, when you say, we've got a volunteer army of data scientists that we're doing, I'm super impressed because I'm thinking, regardless, I'm super impressed. But I'm thinking data scientists are people with PhDs, right?
A lot of them. Yeah, so a lot of them do have PhDs in stats and maths and physics and computational biology or something. But a lot of them have learned on the job. So data science came out of industry. It didn't come out of academia. So actually, if you've got an actual master's in data science, then you're probably really young, because most people don't. And a lot of people just have a background more in maths and stats or physics and just learned on the job and taught themselves to program. So it's quite a new field. And then also, when we start talking about artificial intelligence, we're not really talking about anything different. It's all the same stuff and it's the same people. And I think I feel like every year there's a new buzzword. And so we went from a while ago being data science, then it was machine learning, and now it's artificial intelligence. And I feel like people don't realize this is just the same. These are the same people. These are the same issues. It's all the same jazz. But we just put new labels so that it sounds cool and sexy.
That is and yes, that couldn't be truer. And again, very impressed. Do you have a question or two for Tin?
Yeah, I kind of just wanted to know, when I actually wanted to know, I'm always interested in failure stories of the worst project you've ever worked on, obviously not naming names, but when you're working with an organization to help them implement a digital tool or do a data project and it just didn't work, and what your takeaways were.
Ooh, okay. I have one really good one, but I have to redact myself hard on it.
Okay.
So, but we can say it was a project for country that is a democracy by name, but a totalitarian regime by everything else, that wanted to create a system to open up their data, and their starting point was to think about installing a CCAN instance. For the listeners who are not familiar with CCAN, it's an archive platform, a platform that archives and presents open data for a government, which basically presumes that you have the data to put in. It's kind of like saying, I want to start growing wheat, and my first step will be creating a huge hangar, hoping that it will be full of wheat for some unknown reason, by probably magic. So I think that was a very interesting one, because it was it actually required a lot of breaking down concepts and breaking down the data pipeline. Basically taking the organizations back to what it means to actually produce data, and where does this data come from, and where does it live today. And it doesn't live in very nice places today. It lives, but it lives in big ledgers, handwritten ledgers, literally. That was like the biggest challenge, was kind of like take a lot of steps back to see what can be practically done, so that one day a CCAN instance might be useful. But I mean, that's pretty much where we left it off, because then the government buy-in kind of just fizzled at that point.
But you basically dissuaded them from doing the project.
Yes and no. I think I dissuaded them from doing that project because they understood that it would have been pointless. But I think they probably just like shifted around some things and then just dedicated themselves to other parts of it. And my fear is that, well, we can say like the worst case scenario would have been spending a lot of resources to build an empty platform. At least that won't happen. But I don't know how far we will get with actually start from the ground to build the process, because again it will probably take years to get to a point where they are actually ready to use a CCAN instance, and it lost completely its shininess, right? A CCAN instance can be up in a couple of months, and we can say there's something, and we can point people to a web link. But telling people we're doing a 6-month pilot project on digitizing processes of collecting data that one day might result in a better data set for decision making and efficiency, it's like, oh, that sounds so sexy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have to say, like the big indicator for me that a project is likely to fail is if somebody walks in with just the we want to use this tool because it's this tool, and that they haven't done the hard thinking. But then the other thing I think that it has also an indicator for me around technologies, or an indication for failure. Often, when groups are starting to grapple with technologies, if the organization itself is not a healthy organization and knows what it wants to do, the technology can often highlight the lack of strategy, or the lack of thinking through of where the organization is trying to head and the impact it's trying to make. And so, that can just be a huge indicator.
But so on that, actually, when we start a project, we have this data maturity assessment we do to try and work out where an organization is at and what kind of support they need. But really what I wish we had was a are you well managed or not assessment, because I think that is also so key, but we don't dare go there. But I think if it's a badly managed organization, then the last thing they need is technology.
But that's really valid, because I think that's one of the things that for us as intermediaries around data and technologies, you start to understand what that looks like in terms of what is bad management, and then it's the bit of you try to figure out how to use your intervention to sort of highlight in a gentle way that is sort of based around this discussion, where you can get that out. And there's a fine art and science, and I would have to say, just to get the title in once more, mad skills to sort of get that happening. But also, Emma, I am so glad that you've mentioned the data maturity checklist a couple of times, because that is something that resource that people have mentioned a couple of times in this series. Curious in terms of, do you have other things you want to plug in terms of DataKind's UK stuff that people should know about?
Yep. So We recently set up office hours. So if any nonprofit, social enterprise, charity wants to just come and get some advice, either like literally we can look at your data and say like, you know, what state we think it's in, or if they want to throw around some brainstorming about what's possible or not, then it's the first Wednesday of every month in Old Street. You can also join virtually. And I think, Dirk, you can share the link. So that's just like free advice with some of our data scientists. And then we also have this kind of newly formed peer-to-peer network. So if you are in the UK and you are a data scientist or doing advanced analysis within a nonprofit, then email me and join that group. And that's it, I think. Oh, and just on the data maturity framework, it's definitely not a checklist. It's definitely far too detailed for its own good. But just in terms of how people have been using it, it was quite interesting. So we just kind of put it out there, and we've been getting feedback that senior leadership teams of charities have been sitting down with it and trying to all agree on where they think they as an organization sit on it, on this kind of framework, and then using that to work out what the next level is for them. So to help build and like design a data strategy off of it. Which is quite cool.
Interesting.
Tien, do you got stuff? Oh, also just to say, sorry, I will be sharing those links. I was actually just trying to grab it, and my mail program seemed to be bringing down my entire system, which I quickly shut it off. But I do have those, and we'll be sharing them as well. So, Tien, do you have things you would like to plug?
I have two things to plug. One is I wrote a paper around the role of algorithms in digital media, and it's an open. It's on Gitbook, so anybody can download it and use it as a movie, as an EPUB. It's actually also on Amazon. You can go and purchase it for your Kindle. I'm going all in with the web publishing here. I would like to say it's a light read because it's 80 pages, but it might get dense-ish at some points. But what I would like for people who are actually joining this call, if you're interested in checking it out and then letting me know what you think, the whole idea of having it on Gitbooks is that we can, revision it and build it up. That's one. And the other thing is, speaking of office hours, likewise, if you go on my website, which Dirk will then plug later on, tim.fyi/about, you can book a call with me and chat with me about things. I have this, I do like quick interventions for anybody who wants to do them, and I try to keep my schedule like open enough to give 30 minutes of chat to anyone who has need for a chat. Or not even a need, if they just want to talk to me about, I don't know, beard products. I'm also in.
And food.
Always.
And digestion. And always.
Always.
Always. I also curious in terms of other external things that are not from your organization, but are there any sort of readings, resources, or projects out there that you're getting inspiration from in terms of your own work? What's inspiring your work?
So I already mentioned Cathy O'Neill's Weapons of Math Destruction. I think if you haven't read that, you should read that.
Plus a million to that one.
Yeah. I've just started reading Everybody Lies, which I'm really into. I can't quite remember the author's name, but it's he's a former data scientist at Google, and he's been analyzing a lot of kind of internet search data and seeing what humans are actually looking at on the internet, which is quite sad but totally fascinating. So it's about how weird sides of us get revealed through search engine data.
That's I have to say, I heard an interview with him recently, and that stuff is the searches around porn were really Anyways, we want to keep this safe for work. So
yeah, imagine not sure how relevant that is to people's job here. But anyways, and then the only other thing was DataKind in the States has like a data science 101 resource they put together, which I think is probably just handy if people don't know what data science is and want to learn.
Great. Tien, what's been inspiring you lately?
Again, yeah, plus $1 million to weapons of mass destruction. So a couple of things that I like to use from this perspective, like raising the ambient data literacy knowledge of organizations. I love databasic.io, which I know that Rahul was on the podcast as well. I think it's a great tool to start playing around with some fundamental concepts and getting to grips with some fundamental concepts of what can be done through data analysis. And in the same vein, rawgraphs.io basically it's an online data visualization tool that uses a lot of visualizations from one of the most famous visualization libraries, the D3 library, and it's actually a really good tool to use when you talk to people around how you can tell stories with data, because you have so many different options of data to choose from and different very basic data sets you can use to kind of walk people through what do different visualizations mean and how you can visualize a certain type of data rather than another type of data. When does a histogram make sense, and so on. And it's actually a really, really interesting dialogue that starts, because people start thinking in terms of what can I get the data to tell me through different types of manipulation of that data. And the last one about the algorithms is Data Society published a really, really cool paper called Media Manipulation and Disinformation Online. Ooh. That kind of does this scoping study, a mapping out of the main actors and drivers of this post-fact, fake news world, and it's a really good read. It's a really good scope.
Great, and also just I just have to say, because one of these things that is always brought home to me, both in terms of where we've gone in the conversation, and then thinking about these things that we are plugging in, these resources, just to say, how important it is for intermediaries, but also organizations themselves to be sharing learnings, right? And how important that is for us to be able to keep functioning in the jobs that we are doing and moving things forward. So, both of you, Tin and Emma, you are really excellent in terms of getting your learnings out there, and I just want to applaud that, and want to make sure that people are encouraged to keep that kind of behavior going, because we as a sector need to learn from one another rather than being proprietary around our knowledge and keeping it closed within ourselves. Anyways, my little theory of change, never mind. For the whole world. Anyways, just to say that this then concludes this online conversation for Data as a Team Sport. It's great to be doing this deep dive into mentors, mediaries, and mad skills. Big thank you to Tin and Emma. Also want to do a big thanks to, oh my God, wait a second. God, that was terrible. That you will then note the
edit.
The magic of audio editing. Got to say a big thanks to Caitlin Rogers and the School of Data team for making this all happen. Stay tuned to the School of Data website for more information on the next Data is a Team Sport conversation. We are currently working this one, magically getting guest speakers and all that, but I think it's going to be around incentivizing government to open data, and we're really looking forward to that. You can find the notes from these conversations along with links to the video recordings of the Hangouts on the School of Data website at schoolofdata.org. Have we mentioned the podcast series? You can find it on the School of Data website, SoundCloud, the iTunes Store, and Stitcher. Just search for Data is a Team Sport. And want to thank this with a big thank you to our participants. Tom, Stubb, thanks for being here. You really helped motivate us, so we are super glad and appreciative of your presence. But hope this has benefited and informed your own data literacy efforts. And with that, I'm going to hit stop.